Up next is a panel discussion on enablement and ecosystem development, R&D collaboration and policy support. The session will be moderated by Ms. Nidhi Pratapneni. A quick introduction about her. She's a Senior Vice President at Wells Fargo. She heads public affairs as well as product analytics and modeling for India and the Philippines. In the past, Nidhi has worked in consulting, retail and tech industries through her role at McKinsey & Company, Safeway, Dunnhumby and Dell. Nidhi, over to you.
Thank you so much. I hope I am audible. Sure. And also checking yes, on all the panelists. I see Piyush, Professor Mosam. Are you there and Uday?
Yes, hi.
Okay, okay. So it's been very fascinating listening to all the discussions so far. And in fact, the last point that was raised around, we're talking about vaccine diplomacy. And I guess NLP might be the next frontier where we develop systems and we are able to spread those technologies around the world as well. So really excited to begin this discussion with three experts in their field. Good afternoon to all of those who are attending and a very warm welcome to each of the three panelists, and look forward to a really fabulous discussion in this space. I think we are at this confluence of, we have an age-old heritage and cultural complexity that India entails, India and its languages. We have had this unique ability to leapfrog into cutting-edge competencies. And we're also looking at, the power of technology and specifically AI and leveraging it for India. And so, the potential to drive a lot of positive experiences and outcomes for the Indian population. I think the way we have seen in fintech and so many other spaces, and NLP is also, as we have heard over the last 1 hour, another frontier that will, enable a lot of changes in how we experience and we transact goods and services in India. So without much ado, let me get into this discussion on the enablement and development of the NLP ecosystem in India. And we are focusing on three different aspects, and we have people representing those. What I'd like to do, just to start off in a more interesting way, is do a rapid fire, give me 3 bullet points kind of Q&A. And I wanted each of the three of you to sort of think about what are the 3 top of mind, either challenges or possibilities that excite you about this space. And as I go along, I will introduce the panelists as well. So I'll start with Mr. Uday Nagaraju. Uday is the founder of AI Policy Labs and a co-founder of Global Policy Insights. He's based in London. Uday?
Thank you, Nidhi. So thank you very much, and very fascinating conversation so far. I've been looking through. So 3 areas which kind of excite me. One is the potential of NLP to address critical governmental issues in terms of how it can influence the public services and how analyzing public feedback, improving predictions, and so far. The second and third are perhaps linked. One is the potential that the multilingual NLP in Indian languages can contribute to inclusive development, breaking all the barriers, access, going to the remote parts. Third is, of course, a link to the second point, which is the NLP advances in vernacular Indian languages, both in terms of text and speech, which can offer to the overall development. Because we see 95% of Indian population is deprived of English, so they're missing out on the benefits, which can utilize the huge internet subscribers and mobile phone users. So these are the 3 main points.
Thank you, Uday. And we would love to go deeper into your expertise in the policy area and how these emerging technologies and their impact on policy and governance. Thank you.
Sure.
Moving on to Professor Mosam. And the professor is one of the leading scholars in AI in India. He is faculty of the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at IIT Delhi. And he is also the founding head of the School of AI, which I believe has recently been launched. So hello, Professor Mosam, over to you.
Thank you, Nidhi. And yes, School of AI was launched just 6 months back. Three things that keep me up at night. So as an NLP researcher, one is access to information. We are drowning in information, and we really want to get the machine to play a role of our personal assistant, who we just ask a question in our language and the machine is able to give us the required amount of information, not too much more, because we just can't deal with it. So that is one. The second is that for us, language is not in isolation. Language is tied to the physical world. It's ground to the physical world. For machine, that may not be true. So one of the very important research areas that I feel that someday should really take off is language grounding. When I say a book, the machine figures out visually what does that book mean, can touch the book, can lift the book. And so when we interact with any kind of other modality, then the language needs to be grounded in that modality. And that is something that really excites me. And last but not the least, from a more technical point of view, NLP has made a huge amount of progress, but it is still in the shackles of large amounts of annotated data. And so I'm really hoping that tomorrow we are able to create systems where NLP systems can be trained with just very small amounts of training data, like we as humans often learn very fast. And one of the areas we are exploring in that context is neurosymbolic AI. Not the current forum for us to discuss too much in depth, but Rajiv also said, can I bring together linguistics, statistics, and neural? In the very same way, we are saying, can we bring together neurons and symbols so that we can build these data efficient NLP systems?
Thank you, Professor. It's quite fascinating how so many different disciplines are converging together. I mean, at a very high level, we talk about STEAM as opposed to STEM, but then there are so many different facets to it when you talk about books, what they connote, and so much more. Thank you. And last but not the least, I'd like to introduce Mr. Piyush Jha. And Piyush brings to us the commercial, the application angle. He has been head of technology and digital solutions for GlobalLogic. And I think Piyush mentions in his own blog that he thrives on working with the technology folks and also connecting them with the requirements of the Fortune 500 companies that they have been serving. And in fact, I saw in the news that Hitachi is about to acquire GlobalLogic. So congratulations, Piyush, on that, and welcome.
Thanks, Nidhi. Yes, it's been a busy few weeks for us getting close to the deal, and we're proud of the kind of valuation we got and the kind of trust that is placed in us. Also, re-emphasizes the fact that we want and do operate at the bleeding edge of technology. I think, like you say, without much ado, coming back to the topic, I would extend from the last point that Mosam had mentioned in the amount of data that is really drowning us. And, the more NLP brings us closer to a human level intellect, the more afraid we get of the amount of data that we are creating and how do we make sense of it, right? So can machines approximate, can machines, kind of triangulate and get to a human intellect level and make a good judgment call? And how does NLP fit into all of this is one good area to exploit. The second is, how do we make it work so that we make tech for good happen? There's a lot of good that we can do with tech, and technologies like Edge and NLP and machine learning can help us a lot with that. Right? Like we use ML modeling and technologies for pod detection on Indian roads so that we can alert people on what's going on. So what can we do with NLP so that we make tech for good easier? The third is an ethics question. Of course, we'll need to, while we talk about policies and framing policies and stuff like that, we need to be careful about what are the pitholes that we open up while doing that, and are we arming tech in such a manner that we start straying beyond the ethic boundaries. So that is another area while framing policies we should be aware and be thoughtful about.
Sure. And yeah, I think the whole AI, is it good or evil, has been a matter of a lot of debate. And what we have seen as, the common user sees that, yes, WhatsApp Facebook seems to be reading what I write in WhatsApp, and vice versa perhaps, and also sees a lot of the recommendation engines, Alexa, listening to us. So if we were to talk more about, the positives that this NLP ecosystem can bring, what are those outcomes in very different industries that you can sort of draw out a picture of?
I think, two industries that come top of my mind, they are healthcare and education, both in which we can combine NLP, ML, and a bit of edge to give a lot of edge to the solutions that we create, right? One solution that we currently are working on is can we make doctors hands-free while they interact with patients, right? So, while a doctor is assessing a patient, a lot of bandwidth goes into the hands writing on a pad and trying to create a prescription that will be handed over to the person. Now, can we interpret intelligently what the doctor means to prescribe, and can we get that down onto a digital form while the doctor just keeps speaking, right? And if you are able to process what is being spelled and work with that, then since the information is already digital, while the person is in room and the doctor is there, can we apply, and we should be able to apply edge technologies to warn if a part of the prescription is not fully correct. Let's say there is a flu circulating in that area, or the patient has a history of something that the doctor has kind of ignored or not paid full attention to. Since the information is already digital while you're operating on it, will we be able to alert the doctor that there is some issue that has happened, right? That is a use case that sprung up as pretty useful amongst what we are currently working on. And there would be a plethora of use cases like this where you could apply what is being said, what exists, and you could team it with edge technologies and be able to give very insightful outlook or thoughts on what's happening. The second very obvious area seems like we have been working to applying emotional intelligence on social media posts, right? And kind of analyzing those posts to identify pockets that could be miscreants, could create trouble and do stuff like that. With a lot of stuff going voice and going video in those posts, will soon lose our edge if we keep operating on text that is written. With NLP coming in and with our ability to be able to interpret what is being said, interpret the tone of and tenor of what is being said, will we be able to operate on videos and audios in a similar manner as we were on text, and still be able to find miscreants or find stuff that could cause unrest in societies. So these are the kind of themes or use cases that keep us busy, and that we like dabbling or exploring in. We are working on so that we could utilize this set of technologies to our advantage.
Let me add a couple of thoughts here to what you said. So I mean, I think there's a simple abstraction here. For the last 30, 40, 50 years, humans have been speaking to machines in machine language. I mean, we program in computers language. We don't speak in C or C++ or Java between two humans, right? We speak only to machine like that. But our language of communication has always been, English, Hindi, whatever one of our languages. And I think the time is slowly coming when we would be interacting with machines in our language. Now, whether the time is now or 10 years from now, 15 years from now, it's not very clear. Different verticals may move slowly and fast. But for example, we see the proliferation of chatbots in pretty much everything. And that's just NLP. And that is the place where instead of filling a form, we can just go on WhatsApp or whatever Telegram channel and let them know that this is what we want to buy, and this is the problem, and the machine deals with it to a large extent, or the human takes over later. I mean, we are reaching an era where we will be talking to machines in our language. Moreover, we are also reaching an era where we will be speaking to each other through the medium of machine, right? Whether it be a Gujarati Italian speaker coming together, or whether it be the machine looking at social media posts, because we are sharing our thoughts and views on social media, but there is so much of social media, and so the NLP will be dealing with it and look. So whenever the machine has to deal with whatever human thinks and expresses, the human would have always expressed it in their language, and the machine would add value after understanding the human language. And which, if you take this view, you get into any vertical, any kind of it. If it's business processes, all the processes are listed in human language. If you want machine to help, machine will have to understand it. If you look at legal domain, all the case histories are written in human language. And if you want a machine to help the judges or the lawyers, again you want. So you start thinking about any vertical, you will find that all the information, all the knowledge is in human language, all the communication is in human language, and the machine will be able to add a ton of value there. So I think the sky is the limit when we talk about the value of an
So,
I'll just add.
yeah, go ahead, Uday. Yeah,
I'll
I was just
just
trying to
add.
bring in your policy. Yeah.
Okay. And I'll just add to what both Mausam and Piyush have mentioned, and more in kind of very simple examples. I mean, not sounding too ambitious, I'll give 4 examples from 4 different parts of India. An old lady from Bengal, for instance, who can only speak in Bengali, interacts with a health application about an eye problem. The application then analyzes and after some back and forth, suggests some remedial measures, increasing the lady's awareness and of the issue and referring to an appropriate specialist, for instance. A second example could be a farmer from a remote village in Gujarat searches in Gujarati to find information on precise measurement of water and fertilizer input for their crop. This can significantly affect their cost and the production and have efficiency in production. Third, a visually impaired person who can only communicate in Telugu starts utilizing the language technologies to do many things like reading, shopping, significantly increasing the quality of life, productivity, and decreasing the dependency on others. And finally, a lady from Uttar Pradesh, interacts with a mental health application in Hindi, explaining her symptoms. The application asks basic details, analyzes, and responds with appropriate first-level information. So these 4 examples, where these innovations can, one, significantly improve the quality of life, they can increase productivity and overall well-being.
Sure. So Uday, at the same time, one from a policy perspective, how does policy need to evolve to, one, enable this, and also to set up a framework to ensure that things don't go out of control? And what is the global versus Indian national dialogue or challenge that you're seeing on the policy front?
Yeah. So, I mean, when we talk about policy on NLP or AI in general, I mean, it changes from country to country, firstly. Then the policy considerations must be two-pronged. On one hand, there should be measures for building the required skills and capacity, research, and creating the ecosystem for using the benefits of AI both in public and private sector, towards inclusive development and social good. On the other hand, policy must also consider the potential risks and possibility of societal harms, including aspects of ethics, safety, security, privacy, and bias. Now, how we achieve that? The specific steps could be, first one, investment into basic and applied research and development for NLP in Indian languages through research grants specific to NLP in Indian languages, and research institutions also looking at these. The recent budget allocation to NRF, the National Research Foundation, is a great development, and the national language translation missions efforts could be strengthened if there are grants specific to each Indian language. The second one is through talent attraction, development and retainment, which is very, very important to do further research and to also maintain the kind of leadership within AI. It's the retainment of skills in AI is very important. The third one is the future of work. As we all know, AI is going to bring new jobs, but at the same time, it could displace many jobs. So we have to. So the governments could look into, one is kind of research into what are the types of jobs that will be displaced. Then two, to address the efforts and how long are we looking, 1 year term, are we looking 2 years term, and what is it in the long term? Then the efforts there need to be to address that. Perhaps the governments need to invest, one, in STEM education, two is national retraining programs, and also impact on lifelong learning. However, there could be some sections of the society, perhaps, someone who is already at a certain age or with only certain level of education, perhaps might be difficult to pick up certain new skills compared to, say, perhaps a young person who's a Mausam student at IIT Delhi, perhaps. It's much it might be different sections of society when we look that 95% of Indians are deprived of English and many other things. Another area is looking at how AI could be used, NLP could be used in the governmental sectors in influencing the policy making itself. If you see that UAE has a ministry in AI, perhaps the only government in the world to have an AI ministry, something that can look at AI for public administration and also improve the overall policy, not just policy on AI, but AI improving the actual policy itself. And then the ethics and regulation, the most important bit, which you have alluded to, and you and others have alluded to. So these, for these, there are ethical codes and standards that are being developed across international organizations. Those need to be looked at. Now, the global versus local narrative. If we see at a global level, many countries have launched their national strategies, and there is bound to be competition to win AI investment. That's the nature of the game. However, if we see, there are some initiatives which are like non-competitive initiatives, like Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence, which is run by OECD, where India is a founding member. This body looks at AI, responsible AI, the data governance, future of work, and these areas, bringing in key experts. So perhaps that's also another some of these platforms where the frameworks are being developed. But at the same time, those frameworks might not exactly work in India because our context is different. Our the rich languages and the population that we have, it's very different. So these have to be fit in with the local context, the local socio-economic context, the geography, the diversity. It has to align with the national priorities and also with the institutional complexity within the country.
And in fact, just to ensure that we are, reflecting each diverse aspect of the country and multiple languages, your point on investing by language in research, I think that was quite interesting. And I'll, move on to Professor Mausam to talk about the research landscape and what does it look like today. Are you seeing, a lot of work done more in certain Indian languages than others? What is being done to accelerate, the research to application and that whole feedback cycle in this space?
Sure. Let's see. So first of all, a very interesting suggestion, Uday, on the funding per language. But we have to realize that NLP works in two different ways. One way in which NLP works is somebody puts together a big corpus, which is annotated, on the basis of which some machine learning algorithm typically takes over, right? Of course, you can bring in some syntax and language specific idiosyncrasies and so on and so forth. Nobody's disagreeing with that. So if we put in the amount of effort that you are talking about in creating these data resources, then I think it can be a game changer. On the other hand, the algorithms will look pretty much the same whether we are talking about Gujarati or whether we are talking about Kannada. So I think it is important to distinguish the two, to separate the amount of funding that needs to go into creating language specific data resources, absolutely, but not specific funding for language, different languages for algorithms. The algorithms need to be typically generic and probably applicable to all possible languages. That is one point I wanted to add to your comment. Talking about the landscape, Nidhi, I think research really happens because of three things coming together today, at least modern AI research. One is data, one is compute, and one is the people who understand the deep machine learning algorithms are able to use the data to train the machine learning system using the compute at their disposal. Unfortunately, and I'm a little bit sad to say this, but India is a little bit behind in all three respects. You may have thought that we will have lots of data, and we do. There's no question about it. But we don't have lots of annotated data. I think that's the important distinction. So we have and this happens to me so many times when a company approaches us or somebody approaches us who's not from AI, saying, look, I have so much data. Why can you not make use of this and do AI on top of it? And it becomes very hard for me to explain that whatever behavior, whatever functionality you want from AI, right? You want input-output pairs to be annotated. often they only have the input, they never have the output which can be used to train the system. And that is where a lot of the talks get derailed. So what I have felt is that people are talking about data, and I think the government is also thinking about investing in data resources. I think that is the first thing we need to do. The second very important thing is compute. Now, you may be surprised or not to hear that GPT-3, which really created such a furor that coming out of OpenAI, and suddenly it started doing things that nobody believed was possible. If I were to retrain GPT-3 using exact methodology that they have and exact data at their disposal, it will take us $4.6 million of compute to just retrain GPT-3. It is mind-boggling to think about. OpenAI can do it because they have been heavily funded by such a large venture capitalists and so on and so forth. I don't think even Stanford can think about training GPT-3 from scratch, and definitely nobody in India, and often probably the rank 21 to plus universities, even in the US, cannot think about that. We are really in research fighting a game where there are so many people, there's an inflow of people that has come into AI, lots of amazing people have come into AI, quality of research has gone up. But as researchers, in order to stand our ground, we need to move extremely fast, much faster than what we had to move 5-7 years ago. And availability of high volume compute is incredibly essential right now. GPU resources are scantily available in the country. And I think the government is really working hard on this aspect of it. Niti Aayog called it the Aravat. I think it's a beautiful name, just the big elephant which is needed to really make this AI work. And I think the government is still thinking about how to distribute the money, what mechanisms. But I'm hoping that 2 years down the line, when we talk again in some panel, we have many supercompute clusters available in the country which we can all plug into and actually train our models and move faster. Last but not the least are the people who actually understand the technology to its depth. This happens to me so many times. A startup comes to me and says, look, we have this one data scientist who is not really trained in AI, but he's picked it up and he's stuck somewhere. How do we get around this problem? And look, you have to realize that AI is a mathematically sophisticated field. NLP is a mathematically sophisticated field. And if you are stuck somewhere, you cannot look at the level of API calls. You have to go inside. You have to think, what is the math? Maybe a standard CNN or a standard transformer is not going to work for your problem. Maybe there's a special structure in the problem. You need to innovate. And that is where I feel that if you count the number of NLP researchers who are high quality NLP researchers in our country, and when I say high quality, it's very simple. They publish at ACL, NACL, EMNLP. These are the top conferences in the world for NLP. I will be able to count on 2 fingers of my hand. That's it. Two hands, your fingers of my 2 hands. That's it. We have very small number of very high quality NLP researchers in our country. And we need to work very hard to bring people back in, because even if it's startups, whether it is big corporate offices, everybody would need some support coming from the deep end of technology, deep end of research, and we don't have enough support to give. So I am, unfortunately, I'm sounding a little negative. I don't mean to be negative at all. I really want us to succeed in the long run. And so therefore, I hope that collectively we work towards bringing these 3 verticals in shape so that the research infrastructure strengthens, the corporate infrastructure will strengthen, because capacity building always happens top down. If I train 100 people, they can become teachers later and they can train further 100,000 people, or they can take jobs. But if you pick it up from Coursera and so on, you will not get the depths of the field until you'll have to really struggle. You can possibly get it, but you have to really struggle. So that's my sort of quick response to your.
I think it's a pretty important point, Nidhi, and right at this forum, right? As against quite a few technologies that have come in the last few years, where the basic structure of framework exists and people can pick it up and kind of utilize the APIs to create wonders, or create, like people could create mobile apps, right? This is a deeper technology, so people will need to be trained bottom up. Which is what many people are not doing, and thus they fail or create results that are inadequate, and then get surprised on why they're facing the challenge.
And Piyush, do you see that in the corporate world, like with the Microsofts and the Googles, depending so much on their their R&D investments in India, are they able to invest much more than what, say, Professor Mosam may be seeing in the non-corporate side of the Indian landscape?
So I think from a corporate perspective also, there is a divide, right? There is one part of the ecosystem which feels that people could walk their way through NLP, and they would rather invest in picking people or hiring people and working their way through this. At times they would succeed. They would be able to find a few guys who are pretty good and do the job, but more often than not, they do not succeed. Then there is a second segment which does exist at companies like Google or Microsoft, which understands, there's a much deeper giant. There are COEs within, and we are ourselves trying to create a COE that operates on the trijunction of technologies around ML, Edge, and NLP. But it is not easy. I can tell you that. So I think there will be an investment on that, and that will be something that is significant. And then there is a third segment, right, which kind of, I'm almost sure, will give up on NLP or whatever it produces in a few quarters after seeing that it doesn't materialize what they are trying to get around. And then they'll wait a couple of years for this technology to become more mainstream, and then be laggard adapters, which is not a bad thing per se for the corporate world, but that will not be something that the corporate leaders will use.
Okay. Were there any views on policy levers that can help with this?
I think one is the international cooperation one to begin with, and general kind of cooperation in terms of on any kind of research everywhere. Of course, we're talking specific about Indian languages, but the experience that that we get from across the world is one that is useful. Second, one thing what I see is the private sector is generally not kind of included so much into conversations when we talk about sustainable development goals or inclusive development. But I feel that private sector does add, and it has reinforced particularly with the pandemic. If we see just going on to pandemic, the gap for sustainable development goals was around 2.5 trillion US dollars per annum. That was increased to 4.2 just as we moved into the pandemic. Now I think that is where the private sector, which kind of has the expertise, not finance is only one aspect, but the expertise. One aspect that Piyush was also referring to, that and the companies themselves have certain amount of research, etc. So that is the expertise that the private sector can definitely bring in, and they need to be brought into these conversations, which I generally think is not done across the world, not so much as there could be when we talk about research and academic conversations.
Sure. Thank you. Then I know that we are a little over, so I think I will try and wrap up in 3 to 5 minutes, if that's okay. The one or two things I wanted to touch upon, was the idea of what are some of the use cases that you're seeing which are really stellar. So perhaps on the research side, Mausam or Piyush, on the more commercial startup space, any really novel applications that you're seeing that you can share with us?
Sure. So let me share from the research side. I mean, research obviously runs maybe 4 to 5 years ahead of the curve. So some of those things will eventually translate. But one of the things that happened in the last 2 years is this advent of pre-trained language models. I think everybody knows this. Even Manish Gupta talked about BERT as one of those poster child things that Google have done, and has revolutionized the field to a large extent. So now these pre-trained language models are becoming more and more multilingual, and that's very interesting, because that basically says that, look, you give me any language in any sentences, any language, I will create some representation for that sentence, which will be similar to a similar sentence in a different language. All the languages will come together in a single sort of a multilingual unified model. If we are able to do this effectively, then I think in the long run, this needs for annotated parallel training corpus is going to just go away or become much less. And I think I'm really putting a lot of my hopes on that side of things. The second thing I think that is becoming very interesting is this whole idea that you tell me what the program needs to be written and the machine will write the program for you. Right. So in up until now, we would write the program. Humans would be writing programs for the machines. Now we will just give the specifications and the machine will discover the program. So this is called code generation. And what is code? It's a series of symbols. So you can think of it as text in some weird language, and each curly bracket is a word, and each equal to and so on is a word. And so you can start thinking about a machine just like it can generate a language when it is translating. You can think of it as machine translation system, where the input language is what I told the machine to do and the output language is the machine language itself. So that will be very interesting, and that's something that is starting to happen. And last but not the least, closely associated with multilingual pre-trained models is this general idea of zero shot learning, where I don't give you annotated data. I explain the task in human language, and then I give you an input and I expect the machine to output the correct answer. This is, I couldn't have imagined this would be possible until I saw the recent paper that came out of GPT-3. So this is mind-boggling stuff even for me. And I hope that if this sort of takes off, if more people spend like tens of millions of dollars in creating these very large models, maybe the need for a lot of other NLP research would be obviated, and we will just be able to do zero shot learning. But these are the three things from the research side.
From an industry use case perspective, we are looking at certainly a lot of applications of NLP in healthcare, and wherever somebody would consult, and there exists a language barrier. In Indian context, it will be very useful because India is a very obviously multilingual country. The second sector that we see a lot of interest, and we have started doing a lot of programs around, is in education. Because with the advent of, and of course assisted by COVID, the education, or the onlineness of the education is now a given. People don't really need to be in classrooms to be doing that all the time. Since you have already moved it online, and you assume that there will be a lot of online activity, if we are able to crush across the language barriers, it will make it a lot easier on everybody. The need for really trained individuals in the language that you speak will reduce, which kind of starts making it easy for students. That would go ahead and do wonders for the higher education process in India. It'll make a lot of very niche education available to a lot of people. And then, of course, there's this usage in operating on top of social media, like we spoke about earlier, or in sectors around retail, which, it's commodity market, but it makes a lot of things a lot easier for people.
And I think when you talk about social media, and I'll wrap up here with a final question to Uday, is around, Professor Mosam talks about like the world being, the machine understands everything, and we are speaking to machines, and we also know about the negative images that have been created around, malintent driving some of this. So, right, you have NLP where there is perfect understanding, but how that perfect understanding is used to drive the wrong actions. So Uday, what is this policy impetus towards balancing, open self-regulation versus the external controls that have to be placed on, NLP, AI, in order to, bring in responsible AI?
Yeah, so very nice question there, Nidhi. It's just that, as Professor Mosam was mentioning, mentioning about AI programs being able to program themselves, as that itself, poses. So earlier when we were talking about AI and NLP displacing people in other fields, we didn't really consider, displacing programmers. But this innovation could perhaps, we'll have to consider it could displace programmers as well. But anyway, speaking seriously, I think there should, as you very well right said, there should be a balance between self-regulation and imposed regulation. Now that could be possible. The first step, of course, is self-regulation. A possibility could be a regulatory framework where wherein like an independent body that reports to Parliament. Certain countries are trying to follow, not specific for AI, but in general for online and others. But what happens with anything? What I see is governments are playing catch up. Particularly because of the way incremental innovations are posing new questions, and that needs anticipatory regulation even before something comes into place. Just as the perfect example is what the latest innovation that the professor just mentioned, and that has posed some questions to us immediately as to what wouldn't. But of course, this is very, very important. These innovations are very important, but the regulatory frameworks have to catch up, and governments are nowhere near it, to be honest, at this point of time. That is where international cooperation comes into picture, bringing in key stakeholders across various sectors, including the private sector.
Thank you.
Can I quickly add something to this? I think this is a very important point, and I know we are out of time, so I'll just take 30 seconds.
Sure.
But I do want to point out two things. A lot of researchers have recently shown that claimed that many jobs will be displaced, but many new, and in fact more new jobs will be created because of AI and NLP. I think we should definitely look at those reports very seriously, because yes, we are worried about jobs going away, but we should realize that in the next generation, we will have lots of jobs to do. And so it is more about a rehabilitation of the people who are displaced. Point number two, a lot of things I talked about are research, they may or may not really happen in the long run. But more importantly, we should always think about technology and its use separately. Where should we use technology? I think should fall under the purview of regulation. So for example, if today you say that every house should have a dishwasher, automatic dishwasher, I'm going to say no, because we really thrive on having our cooks and maids actually, and they get the money through it, and it is important for the economy. But if I were in Japan saying the same thing, I would say absolutely, there are no people who can do these jobs. Let's have automation there. So right, like we have had the automation debate and we have dealt with it, I do not believe that AI debate is going to be very different. I do agree that the role of regulation is going to be important. What application makes sense in a certain country, in a certain setting, is something that the regulation would definitely help with.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Mossam. And with that, we wind up. And the operative word is anticipation, I think. So anticipation of a lot of exciting things, and anticipatory regulation for some of us. So with that, a very good afternoon to all of you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Nidhi, and all our panel members. I think what Professor Mossam mentioned about a common framework for language translation that can be potentially workable with any human language, I think that indeed seems very exciting, and hopefully will solve a lot of problems related to NLP.